Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a video to discuss today's Curse of the Vampire Coast roster reveal. And there's a lot of content to be discussed. I kind of want to discuss a little bit how they might play out in the game, who they might be comparable to, as well as just discuss the units that we've been shown and give some of my opinions on them. So without further ado, let's dive in because there's a lot of content to discuss. This first part, of course, not much to say there. It's just the usual faction rambling. And first and foremost, of course, is Luthor Archon, the poster boy of the faction, who, as we kind of anticipated already, is a bit of a pimped out witch hunter. He's got a pistol, he fires on the move, he's got a rapier that is basically just a duelist weapon, much like Sigvald's or Wulfric's. So one can expect him, by all accounts, he does look like a roided up witch hunter. He's lacks spellcasting though, which is not entirely surprising. He didn't have it on tabletop as far as I'm aware. But he does have very high magic damage, and he also adds this to nearby friendly units, which could open up a very interesting sort of dichotomy or situation for players trying to go up against the Vampire Coast, because either you might be faced up against a Lord who's very tanky against magic, or you might be faced off against a Lord like Celostra Direfin, who's basically very resistant to physical attacks, who's magic vulnerable. Now, I do believe ethereal units are getting a rework this next patch. It's my suspicion. I'll go in that in some bit of detail later on. But nonetheless, there's definitely some ethereal units for which you might want that magic damage, where there are other units like a Luthor Archon for which you just will not want that magic damage. It could be a bit of an interesting situation when you're trying to counter the Vampire Coast. Otherwise, he's got above average speed, which on foot, I would assume most of these lords are going to have pretty comparable speeds, somewhere between the 30s to 40s. I would assume Luthor Archon's going to sit in around 40 like Vlad, but I assume that this is mostly reflective of the fact that he's going to be mounted on a Terrorgeist, which are obviously much more mobile than the Crabs and Necrofex Colossi everybody else gets. He only has medium durability, not entirely surprising, and he's armored enough to be considered armored, so somewhere between the 80 and 100 range for armor, most likely, much like most of the Vampire Count Lords already are. So not really surprising in any way here, I would say. And definitely looks to be interesting. The lack of spellcasting, though, could be an issue, and I'll discuss that in a bit of detail in a bit. Then we do have Count Noctilus, who, as expected, is a hybrid Lord of Vampires and Shadowcaster, which is pretty great, because you don't have any other access to Lord of Shadows with this faction. I'm not entirely sure what spells he's going to get, but especially if he gets Enfeebling Foe, this could be huge. This could be a huge benefit. He's rather slow-moving, which is not surprising, especially if he's on Necrofex Colossus. You're probably going to be looking at mid-30 speed. High mass, once again, not surprising. Heavily armored, not sure if this means on foot or on the Necrofex Colossus. I can't see the Colossus having more than like 80 armor, because it's just like a Hulk made of rotten wood. I would just not, and floated corpses. It just wouldn't really seem right for it to have huge armor. But perhaps on foot he's got more armor, or perhaps they are going to go with some weird route and give it a huge amount of armor, which doesn't really make sense, but you never know. He's able to regenerate HP, which is pretty awesome. Regen is always nifty, and he comes equipped with a pole arm on foot, so that means he's going to be able to cleave down large units pretty effectively. So an anti-large lord with good spellcasting capacity definitely seems like a nice, well-rounded choice, and definitely would seem stronger, I would say, than Luthor as far, and even the other lords here as far as that's concerned. Now, Araness Assault Spite, of course, also anti-large with her halberd, but much more mobile. Basically, I would interpret her as a war dancer with an Azrai Spear. AP, anti-large, high melee defense, but low armor and HP. She's got above average speed, so we're probably looking in the mid 40s on foot. Crab, I would assume, is not going to be much faster, though. She's got physical resistance as well to represent her agility. Interestingly enough, though, her halberd actually sweeps around. It has cleaving attacks, which means there's going to be some splash involved there, which is definitely nifty. She's going to be decent against infantry mobs, hopefully. And she's able to pin units down with her net ability, which I'm not sure if this is going to be a slow or it's going to be a targeted spell like Prevenathrema, Warp Gaze, Bound Net of Mintok, something like that. We'll definitely see how exactly it works out, but it could make her very useful in a utility sort of sense, especially if she's a relatively cheap lord. If she's not cheap, it could become a huge issue, and I'll discuss that in just a little bit, because she doesn't have casting. She has no magical ability, which could become a problem. Then we do have Celostra Direfin, who is a dedicated caster who's ethereal. Now, like I said, I think ethereal units might be getting a rework this patch. The reason being that she's, in her campaign buffs, she's got improvements to physical resist on ethereal units, and I would kind of assume, and it would be odd if, say, an ethereal unit with 75% physical resist went up to like 90% physical resist. or even 80%. It's crazy because that's actually just disproportionate improvement to their survivability against physical weapons. Instead of taking, you'd be taking somewhere between 60% less damage than usual, and even if it's like only 5%, it could be 20 to 60% difference in how much damage you're taking compared to usual. So I don't really think, I think there might be a rework of ethereal units, maybe better generic stats in favor of less physical resist. But regardless, as expected for Caster Lord, she's fragile. She's a powerful caster with access to Lord of Deep. Not surprising. She does appear to have songs that control enemy units, movement speed, buff her own units, and damage enemies. I'm not sure if this is going to be targeted abilities or if it's going to be an AoE, sort of like Empire Warrior Priest, Volkmar, etc. Could be cool either way. Could be really nifty, could be really potent. I would assume there's going to be a charge limit. Like I said, though, not sure if it's going to be like a Rune Lord's Rune Wrath and Rune, or if it's going to be an AoE, like Runes of Oath and Steel and that sort of stuff. And she's going to be able to summon undead Bretonnian Knights to guard her. More than guard her, though, here, I could see the benefit being that it gives you heavy cav on a faction that has very little mobility by all looks of it. They have some light mobility, they've got a handful of flyers, but by and large, I don't think the Vampire Coast is really going to be very flexible, so having some access to cav, even if it's temporary summons, could be incredibly useful. One thing I did forget to mention, though, and this is probably my biggest disappointment here, is Aranis Assault Spite's free company, or Sartosan free company. And as you can see, and this is really the only major disappointment I have with it so far with this unit roster, is the fact that they're literally just reskin free company with axes. Or reskin free company militia. That is incredibly disheartening. I was hoping for like a pirate theme. Someone was mentioning pirate hats. Like that was at least what I was hoping. And instead, these guys literally look like reskin state troops with axes. That is, in my opinion, rather lazy. It is not particularly aesthetically pleasing. It's kind of disappointing. And as far as we can tell, there's only one variant. I'm hoping for more variants, and I'm hoping for more information, perhaps. I'm very disappointed, though, by this aesthetic appearance. And there's not much really with this unit roster otherwise that annoys me, but this is one of those things. And we can see them right here. This guy literally looks like free company with an axe. It's just sad. But regardless, going into the lords now, this was a bit of a surprise. They actually get 2 lords, which if you saw the Tomb Kings only got 1 lord choice, and everybody else is a legendary lord. Beastmen are currently sitting on 1 lord choice, everybody else is a legendary lord. I don't really know why they decided there needs to be 2 lord choices. There is obviously a split. One is anti-large, one is pistol, and basically Uber Witch Hunter, basically Luther Harkon knockoff. They've got access to Lord Vampires, Death, and Deeps, which is great. But I don't know why there needs to be 2. In the tabletop, I do believe the only variant was there wasn't a distinction of male and female. I don't even know if they actually said. I don't think it really mattered. But the distinction was the only one that existed was the missile, I think, in melee hybrid. Whereas here they decided to give us a pure melee and a hybrid lord, which I think is a little odd and doesn't really make sense. It's not like they gave us made-up hybrid lords or whatever for Tomb Kings. Regardless, I think these guys might somewhat obsolete, especially Aranis Assault Spite and Harkon. And the problem is that they come with Lords of Magic, and getting Lords with Magic is always good. These guys are in many ways probably going to be similar to Aranessa and Luther. And one of the problems is that the only access to magic you have as Vampire Coast is the Vampire Fleet Captain, who by all looks seems to be a vampire. He's the same female vampire we get on the Vampire Counts, which, for those of you who don't know, is incredibly expensive. There's a reason you almost never see these heroes take the field with Vampire Counts, and the hugest reason is cost. They're just so stupidly expensive. So you don't want to, like, if you're forced to cough up a good chunk of gold to already get Harkon or to get Aranessa, and then you need to get a caster, so you're forced to cough up gold for a very expensive caster. I could see that being a huge issue, and a huge disincentivization or de-incentivization to run those units, or run those lords. But regardless, it's cool. We get Vampires, Death, Deeps once again, so it looks like there's only 3 lords for these guys, with obviously Noctilus getting his own bit of shadows. Cool new hero, Gunnery White, who's basically your engineer equivalent. He's got AP missile attacks, he's accurate for a zombie. He provides buffs to nearby missile units and replenishes ammo on nearby missile units, which I hope is a limited use ability. If it's a constant steady stream of ammo replenishment, I could see that being a huge balance issue. and something that's really not good for the game. But I will definitely see how exactly that's implemented, and it definitely is a cool concept. Don't get me wrong. I would just be really concerned about balance. Then for other heroes, we've got a Murngol Haunter, and this is another really odd choice by CA, because Cyrene, there's no Cyrene hero, despite the fact that the Siren is specifically a hero in tabletop in the Vampire Coast White Dwarf supplement. She was specifically a hero, and instead we're getting, for our combat hero, our pure combat hero, we're getting a Murngol Haunter, who's got Vanguard deployment, he's got Stalk, he's got high AP, anti-infantry, regenerates HP in melee. All looks very good in all honesty, but it's a made-up hero in a situation where there was literally an explicit hero that should be there, I think, with the Siren. Even if she was competing, even if they were two separate heroes, then I think she should have been there. I don't know why they chose not to include the Siren as a hero. They've shamelessly included redundant heroes that are comparable to Vampire Count heroes already, and I don't really see a problem with that, to be honest. So why they opted to not include a Siren is beyond me. Now going on further into the actual units, well, the first is the Zombie Pirate Deckhands, which if you are rather logically a mix somewhere between Skeleton Warriors and Vampire Swordsmen, dual-wielding swords, so no shields, which could be an issue. These guys, this faction has basically no access to shields, actually. And actually, I don't think they have any access to shields. So you're soaking up missile damage is going to come down purely to quantity and mass, which could become an issue, I could see, especially because a lot of your units are probably going to be light on armor. If you're suddenly forced into shootouts with factions with lots of cheap shooting, that could become a serious issue. But quality-wise, between Empire Swordsmen and Skeleton Warriors, very reflective of the tabletop stats. We'll see how their mobility is, if it's better than normal zombies or not. I would assume it would be. Regardless, these guys do look respectable for a low-tier infantry. Second unit, Zombie Pirate Deckhands with pole arms. Basically, I would assume these guys are going to be a bit like... I would assume these first guys are going to be a bit like Bretonnian Men-at-Arms. These guys, I would assume, like Bretonnian Men-at-Arms with pole arms. Cheap, squishy, dedicated, decent against their dedicated target, though certainly nothing stellar. Though obviously these guys will have the benefit of being unbreakable. Now the fun stuff is really the shooting, and there is a lot of it. There are 4 different units now of just the basic infantry shooting, and there's still more to come down below. But first, the Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mob, which appears to be basically Zombie Free Company. Not surprising, these guys made it. Basically, I would assume them to be crappy Free Company with higher model count. Which, you know, could work. It could be pretty cool, be pretty nifty. Free Company is a decent choice for Empire as is, so for this faction I could see him being good too. Then there's the Pirate Gunnery Mob with rifles. The choice of rifles, like, it should be handguns, honestly, or arquebus, or anything else. They're not using rifles, probably. But, whatever. A little bit of peeve there, but they're able to... These guys are basically your handgun unit by all appearances, so probably AP. They've probably got much higher model count than Empire handguns. I would assume the penalty is going to be lower accuracy, probably lower range, perhaps lower damage per shot, because the weapons are using a rusted up and dripping water and waterlogged and disgusting and moldy and all this sort of stuff. But definitely a high quantity AP missile unit could be amazing, especially if you can bring a lot of them and support them with all this chaff that's unbreakable. You could be pretty nasty against most targets. Black powder weapons in this game are amazing, and this could be really, really strong. The next black powder unit, hand cannons, which are basically shotgun infantry. Disrupts charges, which could be really awesome. And currently there's a meta, and you guys, anybody of you guys who play multiplayer consistently know of how people just spaghetti line. And I could actually see the hand cannons being great if it's like a splash that hits in a cone. I could see it being great at punishing spaghetti lines, because one of the things right now is flamethrowers, especially these guys in some ways would be comparable to flamethrowers. But flamethrowers right now struggle against infantry because they don't tend to blob in multiplayer. People just spaghetti line, so flamethrowers are not going to get huge value. If these guys are hitting in like a cone and they're just hitting the entire line essentially, the value could be huge. I could see this being incredibly useful. And plus the ability to disrupt charges, obviously very good as well. A bit like blasting charges and that sort of stuff. If you can break up those charges, reduce that incoming charge bonus, always a good thing. Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mob's the last cheap shooting unit. Or these guys are bombardiers, essentially, Deathglow bombardiers. I think a lot of these units have equivalents in other factions, so I'm going to be doing a lot of comparisons or a lot of sort of implied, like, assumptions about what they're going to be comparable to. I think Deathglow bombardiers here is what we can expect. That could make them a little iffy. because Deathglow Bombardiers tend to get shut down hard. But these guys being unbreakable could be helpful there. Hopefully they're fairly cheap. That could also be nifty. And yeah, hopefully they work out just pretty well. Otherwise, and this is something I'm not entirely sure about, it could be an ability to throw bombs, because there's another unit, deck droppers with bombers. Bombers who actually seem to have an ability to drop bombs. So I'm not sure if this is going to be an ability or a just their normal weapon. I assume it's going to be a normal weapon. They're grenadiers, but it could not be, and so I'm not entirely sure. Now for the elite infantry depth guard, which we already knew, once again no shields. One's armed with pole arms, so anti-large, obviously very solid. The faction seems to have a lot of options to kill large units. Between black powder weapons, pole arms, and high mass monsters, you're going to have a nightmarish time, I think, of making good use of large monsters against these guys, because you're going to get bogged down and shot to death, I would assume. The depth guard, basically just a raw damage output version of Grave Guard, by the look of it. They did seem to have very slow model counts, which is why I'm a little surprised that they're being compared to Grave Guard, because these guys seem to have like 12 models or something. I actually think they have the screenshot down here, and you can see it's kind of hard to tell on the, but it's 16 models on Ultra, so 12 normal or on large, which is a little odd. I don't know if they're probably gonna have splash, I would assume, and probably doing very good performance on their own. Now elsewhere, Scurvy Dogs, redundant direwolf unit. Not much to say there. It was to be expected. No complaint really. The harass will help. Sirens. Basically wraiths, as far as Cairn wraiths, as far as I can tell. A really odd choice to make these guys a combat unit instead of a hero. I don't know why CA decided to go that route. I don't know why they didn't at least give them a hero variant. You can see the sirens down here, but I would assume they're going to perform like Cairn wraiths. I just find it rather weird that this is the way CA decided to implement them. Especially because this is one of the few units that is explicitly a hero in tabletop, has no infantry variant, and they just completely swapped the type, which I can't think of too many other examples of that happening. Obviously some unit champions were given their own units like Shadow Walkers and whatnot, but this is a little odd. Felbats, Vampire Count knockoff, nothing to say there. Now the two shooting flyers are pretty cool. Deck droppers, probably going to perform a good bit like the Raven Heralds. They've got AP, they fly. I could see this you're going to need to bring some anti-air against these guys, no matter what faction you go as. You're going to need some archers, some shooting of some sort, because you can't afford to let a bunch of AP shooting or AP shooting with shotguns just gun down your troops for free. So you're really going to have to bring some shooting or some skirmishers or some bats or something to tie these guys down, deal with this sort of stuff. There also appears to be a bomber unit, which appears to have an ability to drop bombs, with the units using hand cannons or the shotguns instead, which should be interesting to see how that works out from a flyer. Having a very short range flyer sounds like a bad idea, but we'll see. Deck gunners, coming in small numbers. Well, these are cool. This is a unit that I'm actually pretty hyped for. They're a weapons team that has long range. They've got AP. They pierce multiple entities, which not even Ushopti Great Bows do. And they've got shield breaker contact effect. So I could see these guys working together in tandem with that mass cheap shooting that zombies have of zombie handguns and rifles and gunnery mobs to really just wilt units with shields. You break the shields and you just focus them down one by one, and I can see this being a brutal combo. There's definitely some nasty stuff going on there. Carronade cannons. Now, cool thing though, and these might be weaker. I would assume that these black powder units might be inferior to their Empire or Dwarf equivalents because they're waterlogged and nasty and rusty and falling apart at the seams, whatever. But by and large, essentially, that's what they're going to be like. What is interesting, though, is that we're getting unique projectile types. We're getting Grape Shot, supposedly, on the Carronade. If that's the case, I would assume Grape Shot's going to make it for Empire and Dwarves. It will appear this faction's bringing a whole bunch of shotgun effects, and that's awesome. I'm actually pretty hyped for that. But if we're getting Grape Shot for the Carronade, I would assume that there should be a Grape Shot for Dwarf Cannons and Empire Cannons as well, because they have that on tabletop, and it would make a lot of sense to do that. And that would definitely be pretty awesome to have this dual versatile usage for cannons, where you can either go with a shotgun blast to clear out infantry, or be using those solid shot against large targets, which is awesome. Mortar, well, it's a mortar. But it does appear to have a quicklime shot. Now, given the way the quicklime works in real life, or was used in real life, I would assume it's going to be a projectile that does less splash or less explosive damage, and the projectile would apply the blind effect, because it would make a lot of sense. In real life, quicklime is kind of acidic and could blind you and is nasty and pretty terrible, and was used quite a bit in warfare, especially naval warfare. So it's not really a surprising addition. It's actually a cool little decision by C, I actually think, to implement it. But I would assume it's going to be basically a blind effect mortar. And given the mortar's accuracy, this could be incredibly powerful. Bloated Corpse, a unique suicide unit, as somebody already noted. High mobility, explodes when its HP drops below a certain threshold or on contact with enemy, and does a lot of damage to infantry. So I could see this being having a huge impact and just being really terrifying to fight against. Especially if you can sneak one into close quarters, get it in there, and have it blow up. This could be just crazy. We'll see how it is. I'm not entirely sure how potent it's going to be, but a suicide unit's cool. It also gives me hopes that we might see some suicide units for other factions, like the Greenskins. Finally, the monsters. So first and foremost, Mourngulls, who are a semi-ethereal unit. I'm not entirely sure if they're fully ethereal. They do have physical resistance, though. But they do AP damage. They've got regen in combat because they've got the hunger, which makes sense. They're like basically like Wendigos or something. They're surprisingly fast. They've got stalk. They've got vanguard. They're just very, very potent sort of ambush predator type units, and I could see these guys being very, very powerful and nasty to deal with. And yeah, they seem to be pretty potent. Animated Hulks. These are, of course, the ogres. The first showing of ogres in this game. Hurrah! But they're obviously the nasty ogres. I see them as nasty, rotten, dying, dead ogres. I could see them as being an equivalent of Chaos Spawn. High raw damage, just designed as a screen unit. It basically sounds like Chaos Spawn. Now the Rotting Prometheans, of course, these are the cheap crabs. One of them is pure melee. Both are resistant to missile attacks. If I remember correctly, on the tabletop they had a 3+ scaly skin save. So very resistant to missile attacks, most likely. They've got high mass, high armor, charge defense versus large. All makes sense, all given their function in the roster, given the way they appear to be the high armor of the crabs. It makes sense. One of them is armed with shotguns or has the disruptive hand cannons. I'm not entirely sure if this is going to be a straight upgrade from the Prometheans or not. They do have these little spigots on the top of their shell, so I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a shooting thing as well. Regardless, the unit does seem pretty cool. It's going to give you some staying power, give you some stopping power to prevent enemies from just plowing through your chaff and getting into your shooting. And, you know, hopefully some decent melee stats, some charge defense versus large could be potent. And yeah, we'll see how these guys work out, but I could definitely see them being a nice Treekin, Kroq-Skor-ish hybrid. They could definitely, I think, be pretty cool. Rotting Leviathan, I imagine, is basically an Arachnarch spider that doesn't poison, but has AP projectiles on the top because some of its riders are armed with rifles. Otherwise, basically seems to be akin to an Arachnarch spider. Without proper stats, it's hard to differentiate, but I would really assume it's going to be similar to an Arachnarch spider in its performance. And finally, the Necrofex Colossus, who is probably the unit I'm most hyped for. It's got quad cannon, it's got a claw, it's a hybrid melee shooting unit. It's got 5 riders atop with rifles. It's able to summon zombie deckhands, which is awesome. It means that if you're getting shut down by cav, if you're getting shut down by monsters, if you need to escape, you can drop a bunch of zombie deckhands and worm your way out with the Necrofex Colossus. This faction is going to have a lot of summons, which could be nasty and really frustrating to play against. We'll see how it's balanced out. But definitely Necrofex Colossus I'm pretty hyped for. Now, one of the interesting things is that there's no mention of a flamethrower here. It's only the 4 cannons. And in the trailer, they showed a Necrofex Colossus with a flamethrower. So why that's not mentioned here, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be the unique Necrofex Colossus for Noctilus. I don't know if it's going to be the unique, or if it's going to be a Regiment of Renown Colossus. We'll definitely see as CA releases more info, but I don't know. Deathstreak Terrorgeist. Obviously nifty to have a mobile anti-large. Nothing much to say there. You guys know what a Terrorgeist is. Finally, Queen Bess, which is basically an Uber Mortar that also slows and does ridiculous damage. So definitely should be pretty potent. I don't think it's available in Quick Match, though I could be wrong. And it definitely looked pretty crazy in the trailer. That was one of the most epic parts when the Queen Bess just like elevates the gun and just boom fires. I was just hyped for that. But Necrofex Colossus is especially what I'm hyped for. As far as playstyle, I could see these guys playing out a lot like Tomb Kings. and mixed with dwarves. A lot of cheap chaff, a lot of firepower, not particularly mobile, though having some access to flyers and shooting flyers and some harass in that form. Definitely not like vampire counts who have a bunch of heavy cav though, to give them a huge flexibility. So I wouldn't really assume they're gonna be fairly stationary. I would assume as a faction, slow, steady advance maybe. A few odd choices were made. By and large, I'm pretty happy with the way this is being described. A few odd choices, I think. First and foremost, the only thing I'm disappointed by is just the Certosan Free Company. Like, of the new things we found out. Like, seriously, these guys are literally Free Company with axes. That is sad. I don't know what to say. That's pretty disappointing. Given all these other unique models and given the obvious attention CA's tried to give to a lot of these new units, the fact that Iron-S Assault Spite's unique unit is a lazy Empire reskin is disappointment. Otherwise, though, one problem I could see happening is the fact that both Harkon as well as Iron-S Assault Spite's lack of magic is going to make them an incredibly unpopular pick, just because the only other access to magic you have, I apologize, got something a little in my throat there, but because your only access to magic is the Vampire Fleet Captain, being forced to cough up money for an expensive hero on top of a probably expensive lord could become an issue, and that makes me a little sad about the multiplayer prospects for those two lords. But and then finally, of course, the Morngul Haunter choice. Not necessarily the Morngul Haunter, but the fact that they chose that as their combat hero instead of a Cyrene, which would have made much more sense, given that that's literally what she is on tabletop, a hero. I don't know why they chose to go that way. But by and large, the roster looks pretty cool. It looks like a very shooty roster, dead killy, lots of DACA, quantity over quality. Depending on how things are implemented, I also see a lot of potential reworks for ethereal units coming out with this patch, as well as for the cannons and artillery we already have for Empire and Dwarves, with things such as Grape Shot being implemented, and things such as ethereal units possibly getting a rework, I would think. So I'll definitely be on the lookout for those things, and yeah, that is the roster. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you found this informative and perhaps give you guys some idea of what we might expect. Obviously, I'm hoping CA releases more information in the coming days and weeks, like I said before. Be sure to leave your own thoughts, opinions, comments, concerns, whatever, down in the comment section below. I'll be sure to read them and respond as soon as I can. And yeah, that is it. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.